Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Too loud? Is it too loud? Okay. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the technological advances and forensic challenges of situations that are coming up for us as forensic examiners. So it's not going to be a real low-level, here's how you do this, because when we talk about some of these technological advances that we have coming up, we really don't have a low-level way to go through and do some of these challenges. So I'm going to go over a lot of basic procedures. I'm going to talk a little bit about me only for 30 seconds. Some of you already know me. I'm going to talk do a brief overview of the technological advances that we have coming up. I'm going to cover some legislative and regulatory updates, some of the items that have been in the news in the last week or so, and then some tools and methods that are available for forensic acquisitions for some of the technologies that we're going to run into or that we're currently developing. So I teach here at Bloomsburg University. I have my own business, NextGuard Technology, where I do forensic readiness, security assessments, that kind of thing. Besides having my PhD, I have a ton of industry certifications. I'm a member of the NIST Cloud Forensic Reference Architecture Working Group. I worked with that group for quite a while when they first came up with the cloud forensic challenges. A lot of things that NIST does they're very helpful, but sometimes the way that they put things together, we end up with architectures that may be hard to implement in some of our environments. But they do provide very good reference material for processes and procedures and things like that. And I'm also the president of the Digital Forensic Certification Board. We are a group of forensic practitioners who have two certifications, one for associate, which is students coming out of college that don't have experience, or people that have worked in the field and are retiring, and then practitioners who have at least 5 years worth of experience. And it's a vendor neutral certification, so we don't we don't rely on any type of product or technology. So here we are. This is your case. You're working on a case where the court is going to decide whether or not a suspect can be prosecuted for assault with a deadly weapon. And that deadly weapon is a picture. The suspect says he's not guilty because malware was found pre-installed on dozens of Android phones, and he happens to have a phone that was produced by one of those manufacturers. So his phone already came with malware on it. In addition to that, hackers can use a $5 speaker to control a smartphone and a Fitbit using sound waves. So, in addition to his phone being infected, hackers used sound waves to access his phone and send a picture via Twitter to someone who has epilepsy, causing them to have a seizure. In order to tell whether or not the suspect is really guilty, we're going to use artificial intelligence mind reading technology to tell whether the crime was premeditated or not. So we're going to use AI to hook up some electrodes to his head to figure out whether it was premeditated or not. So this is the case that you're going to work on. Where do you start? Where are you going to start?
Find out the validity and the accuracy of the AI mind reading results.
Okay. Number one, the validity of the mind reading results. What about the suspect's theory that malware and hackers were the ones that did that and it wasn't him? Search his phone? Okay. All right. But these are some of the things that you're going to be facing. as you move forward in the world. I mean, all these topics right here, all these blocks that I have here came out of news bits in the last couple weeks. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about technological advance. It's mostly the Internet of Things because that's the big thing. That's the big buzzword these days, Internet of Things. I'm going to talk a little bit about big data and how big data affects the way that we do forensics, because there's no more push to find the evidence button because we have too much data and we can't do that anymore. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about security, especially because some of the things that have hit the news recently, and how well we are doing security-wise on protecting our resources that we have out there, and why you will all have jobs for the foreseeable future. So the Internet of Things. What is the Internet of Things? The Internet of Things is any device, any time, any place, any path, any business from anybody. So basically, and I have a slide in here from Bruce Schneier, who he said basically what we've done with the Internet of Things is that we've actually created a worldwide robot. We've taken everything and we've hooked everything together worldwide, and we've created one big giant robot. So when we look at implementations for Internet of Things, we look at vehicles, right? Vehicles are a big thing. I know some of you that are students here have gone or will be going to the Cyber Auto Challenge that's held in Michigan in the summertime, where they look at vehicle hacking, pet monitoring, agriculture automation. Agriculture automation is a big thing. A lot of the farmers now are using devices to monitor their crops, to monitor their fields, things like that. There was an article not too long ago about even about the tractors, about how a lot of them were having some issues because John Deere wouldn't let them alter the information in their tractors, and they were looking for ways to kind of hack their tractors. So that happens a lot. Energy consumption, a lot of that too. Let me see. I have another slide. I think the next slide talks a little bit about our resources, our water resources, and our water facilities and things like that. Security and surveillance, people that have cameras in their home, right? There's a lot of articles out there about, wasn't it the dolls, recently the dolls that can pick up your children's voice, right? And when you sign up for an account, they actually ask you to upload a picture of your child. I mean, really? That, to me, is like a big no-no. But anyway, so you're shaking your head. You want to make a comment about that?
I heard about it last week, and somebody dumped all this audio of all the kids talking on the internet.
That's right. They dumped audio, the recordings of the children's voices. So that's a big problem. In addition to the dolls and the toys that are out there for children, then we also have Amazon Echo, right? My husband was somewhere yesterday, and he was looking at a house, and the gentleman there was showing him his Amazon Echo and how he was so proud of all the things he can do with it. And he called me up and he goes, "Guess what? This guy has an Amazon Echo. Do you think we can monitor what he's doing in the property?" He goes, I stopped short of telling him maybe we're going to hack into your Echo and see how well you're taking care of the rental property. But so we have all these devices out there that we do that with. The other thing too is we have machine to machine and wireless sensor networks now. So even our wireless networks are changing. So we have a lot of different things that we do with Internet of Things, everyday things, right? Everyday things. I'm guilty as anybody. I track my steps every day to know exactly how much exercise I get. But we have GPS. There was a big and this was a couple of years ago. There was a big deal about children's shoes that they were putting GPS trackers in, that they thought were good for parents to monitor their children. But then what about pedophiles and stuff in the neighborhood that can see where those children are? So we have a lot of those kind of things. Smart homes, smart cities. That's a lot of what's coming. And telemedicine and healthcare. I'm going to touch on that a little bit, but not a whole lot. I have done security assessments on medical facilities, and I'm really not sure exactly what we're going to do with healthcare and medicine, simply because a lot of the devices that are used in the medical industry are old, and they're built on old technology, and you can't do penetration tests on them, because if you do, you'll break them. You can kill somebody if you break the machine that they're hooked up to. And then on the flip side of that, right, there was the big article about how we had somebody who was going to hack Dick Cheney's pacemaker, right? Yeah, that article about Dick Cheney's pacemaker could be hacked. Now, and recently there was an article that came out where there was a memo put out to the medical community to be careful about the technology that they use. But one of the things about the medical facility that is a little bit, I guess, unnerving to me is that a lot of times when I walk into facilities, you have a lot of workstations that are unsecured. And in addition to that, now you have all your doctors want to be able to use their tablets and their phones, and they want to be able to connect wirelessly. And if those facilities aren't secured, you have a lot of patient data that's going out there. And even though they're subject to regulation like HIPAA, that doesn't preclude anything from happening. I did an assessment on a medical facility that was hacked twice, not once but twice. They were hacked once, and then they had an assessment done, and they're like, we don't want to spend the money, we're not going to fix it. What do you think? A couple months later, they got hacked again, and then at that point, they were really, really, really in deep trouble, and so they had to have somebody come out and look at what they were doing out there. So this is a picture of what a smart world looks like. So we have sensors everywhere, where we're monitoring water flows, we're monitoring vehicle auto diagnostics, item location for when when you're walking by somewhere, you can get targeted for an advertisement for Starbucks. Waste management. Are your garbage cans full? I was reading something the other day about some of the technology that's out there now where they're going to start putting the chips in your garbage can so that the waste management company knows when the cans are full, and whether they can skip your neighborhood when they're going through and doing the garbage pickup and not waste gas because you don't have any trash cans out. Smart parking, golf courses, all that kind of stuff. One of the things that I have a little bit of a vested interest in is our nuclear facilities. Our nuclear facilities, our wastewater treatment facilities, a lot of those, because they use PLCs and the way that they communicate, those tend to be a little bit problematic when we hook up the internet to all our HMIs, because the business units want to see and monitor what's going on that end of it. Traffic congestion, we already have some of that out there. A lot of street monitoring, red light cameras. So you guys don't have a lot of red light cameras out here, do you? Do you have red light cameras out here anywhere? No? No. I came from I was in D.C., but before that I was in Phoenix, and red light cameras in Phoenix were a big, big thing. We had them on all our highways. They snapped your license plate. They snapped a lot of things. And actually there was so much controversy about the use of those red light cameras that actually one of the gentlemen that was going to collect data from one of those cameras, somebody actually shot him. That tends to be a little bit problematic when you're talking about people being vindictive enough because they don't like the fact that they got a traffic ticket, so they're going to kill somebody who's taken the data out of the camera. Smart roads, smart lighting, all that kind of good stuff. Intelligent shopping, and then, noise monitoring. So that's what our cities are going to look like pretty soon. This is your home, right? Your connected car. You all have connected cars now, right? Everybody's got a connected car, right? I barely even know how to do is turn Bluetooth on my phone, and boy, my car picked it up right away, and I was in the car, and all of a sudden, my screen comes up, and it's like, you got an incoming call. I'm like, really? All right. I didn't even have to sync it to the car or nothing. It found it automatically. So, that's the beauty of Bluetooth. Finds anything, right? But, so, you can monitor a lot of things in your car, but then in addition to that, what's really funny about not only monitoring the car, how many of you have been offered to get a discount on your insurance by hooking up a little piece to your ODBC port inside your car. Have any of you ever had that offer? Yeah. The reason I'm asking is because, you know, my dad is a little bit elderly, and he went out and he bought himself a new vehicle, and he comes home from the insurance company and he goes, I have this thing I got to hook up to my car. And I'm like, what? He goes, oh yeah, they're going to give me a discount on my insurance if I hook this thing up to my car. And I'm like, well, you know, I mean, at his age, I can't really explain technology to him too well. And so I'm like, are you sure you're going to do it? Well, yeah, they're going to give me a 20% discount. So I'm like, okay. So we plugged it in, and we plugged it in, and I could, so every week I got a report, because I signed up. And I used my email address, and every week I got a report on how many hard stops he had, how many fast accelerations he had, how many emails he drove, how many miles he drove, and I'm like, okay, this is only the data that I'm getting. Who knows what the insurance company is getting? So but the good thing about it is you only had to do it for like 3 months, and after a quarter, he packed it back up and he shipped it off, and they gave him his discount. But that stands not only, I mean, and that's knowingly. What about unknowingly for people that want to monitor because there's a lot of that. Like when I worked for Parabin, we had a lot of people who asked us if we would install spyware on their spouse's phone so they could track what they're doing and things like that. So even there was a case not too long ago too, where a cell phone, a gentleman was accused, I mean, I think it actually was in the local paper, where he was accused of trying to monitor his ex by putting a GPS application on her phone, and there was a PFA order already against him, and so he shouldn't have been able to do that. However, I don't think looking at what happened, I don't think that he knew what he was doing, because number one, the device that he bought didn't work that way. And so I think that he probably wasted his money and got in more trouble, but, you know, that's the way it goes. But your home, right, appliance control, that's one of the things too, right? How many of you can control your heat from somewhere else, right? You control the heat, turn your oven on, right? Yeah. You can control your heat.
I have a company Baltimore, we have one good Baltimore, so once I start off, I just turn it off. Right now I have it at 65, so I turn it at 75 by the time I get home. So nice and cosy.
There you go. You do that all through your phone, right? Okay. Or through the web, because you don't actually do it through your phone. Most of the time, the way that happens is you connect to an application that then connects to the device, right? Refrigerators. We have a big thing about refrigerators. I mean, we've been talking about smart refrigerators for years and years and years. How, you know, your refrigerator is going to be able to inventory your refrigerator, you know, send your shopping list to the grocery store. The grocery store delivers your groceries. You can have your refrigerator full and never ever leave your house. So those are some of the things that we have in our smartphone, in our smart homes. So that's a little bit about Internet of Things, about how everything is connected. The next topic that I want to talk a little bit about is big data. So what is big data? All the data I have at my house. I had a pretty big data there. So is that when you look at your hex, instead of it being this big, it's this big? What is big data? What is big data? Do we know what big data is? Here's an official description or definition of big data, and I think I took this from the dictionary.com. It's a term that describes the large volume of data, both structured and unstructured, that inundates a business on a day-to-day basis. And I like the word inundates because it is. We have way too much data. When I used to go out and do security assessments, one of the first things we would talk to all the business units, and we would talk about, you know, what kind of data they're compiling and where they're getting their data from. I mean, you have so much data coming in and out of a business on a day-to-day basis, it's unfathomable in a lot of instances. So this basically is a slide to show the differences between what we consider traditional data and big data. And this is important to us as forensic people because number one, traditional data is a little bit easier for us to be able to pull information from. Big data, one of the biggest things is that a lot of it is unstructured, right? When you have a lot of unstructured data from a forensic standpoint, I mean, those of you that are in the cell phone class with me right now, You know that the last thing that we did was timestamps, right? When you have so much unstructured data, how every one of these applications stores timestamps is different. And the formats aren't always the same. So you're going to have instances where you may have to interpret 5 different timestamps 5 different ways. And a lot of times the tools don't automatically change those timestamps for you. And cells is a big one, but you have a lot of unstructured data. The other thing too is normally in traditional data you have a centralized database where everything is stored. In big data, it is highly distributed. Scale-wise, traditional data, we're talking, terabytes, gigabytes, terabytes of data. When we get into massive scale, we're talking petabytes and exabytes. And we have a hard enough time processing terabytes of data. So when we get to look at the way that, how we're going to deal with big data, we're going to have to look for patterns and relationships, not so much pull the information, pull the index, and look at what's in there. We're going to have to look for patterns and relationships. So the way that we deal with data relationships as we move more and more into having to analyze big data, the way that we do forensics is going to change. So these are the 4 V's of big data: volume, because number one, we have a huge quantity of data. Velocity, the speed. Okay, the speed, right? If you're doing network analysis, and you pull log files of something, the speed that we're moving data around at now, if you pulled log files now and then pulled them again 5 minutes later, is your traffic going to be the same? Traffic's not going to be the same. At one point, I knew a gentleman who was working on a tag that would be put in with the ISPs, that we would be able to tag data to figure out exactly where it was and where it came from, because the speed is pretty fast. Variety, data types, and that actually came from the last slide. We have all different types of data, and then the variety is messy. It's like really messy. How do you, normally when you do a forensic investigation, you get a case and it says, okay, this is what we're looking for. So generally the scope of what you have to examine is small compared to what we have in big data. So here's a little bit of some of the challenges in volumes. In the big data volume, we have logs, we have event logs. You got speech recognition, social media, and that's more of on a traditional level. The velocity is the rate of the analysis, the speed of generation. The veracity, untrusted and uncleansed. This is one area that's kind of a little bit of a problem, because if you have untrusted data, then really you have another problem. And that's one of the things that NIST was working on when they were going through and putting together the reference architecture. How do we know that the data we get is trusted data? Do we know that that's good data? So those are some of the issues that we're going to face when we look at big data. So that's your little overview on big data. The next thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm just going to touch on security a little bit, and then I'm going to get into some of the more recent things that have come up. Now we're working on now we have wireless connections for machine to machine and the Internet of Things. So we actually have vendors who have routers and switches for this type of communication. Number one, it's good that those devices are out there and that that they're being implemented. However, as forensic people, that means, what does that mean to us? What does that mean to us? What do we care about this? That we have, we've got wireless connections now, and wireless devices that will manage the connections from machine to machine and the Internet of Things. Why do we care about that? Anybody? Why would you care about it? Why would you care about it? Okay. And the other thing too is, do you know that the method of communication is exactly the same with the type of wireless that you're using now? So it's new devices, It's a new type of data that you have to analyze, right? So we have a lot of other things. Plus, too, there are a lot of unknowns. There are a lot of unknowns, and that's like from the first slide. When the first slide said that that there were dozens of Android devices that have that had malware installed on them when they went to market. A while back, there were, and this was a long time back, some of the cell phones that came out, if you looked at them, they had pictures of the workers in the factory that were testing the phones because they were testing the phones and they took pictures of themselves and they were left on the phone. And you got your phone and you had some pictures on your phone already. So you're right. With these type of devices, you don't know. Is there some kind of backdoor? And there's been a lot about that, about backdoors that have been put in devices, because a lot of our devices come from foreign countries. So, don't know about that. And the other thing is encryption. There's a big push for encryption, but as we deal with encryption as forensic people, it used to be even cell phone analysis. Cell phone analysis used to be pretty easy. If you could get the PIN or you could figure out the swipe on the phone, you pretty much could get into the device. Now, with a lot of the way that we're doing encryption, even if you do a chip off on a phone and you pull that chip out and you put it through a chip reader, if that data was encrypted when that phone was shut down, then all you're going to get, all that time that you spent doing that chip off, all you're going to get out of it is a bunch of stuff you can't read. So encryption is a big problem for us in the forensic world. And depending on what happens with our government, we may be able to have access to encrypted data. However, there's always going to be that push for data privacy, and there's always going to be the push for us to maybe not even host our data here in the United States due to the fact that we've changed the laws. So that's just a little overview on security. So this is something that that came up, and this was when I was talking about wireless technologies. So here we go. This came out, this was February 1st of this year. This is from up there in British Columbia. Sierra Wireless. They were a provider of fully integrated device-to-cloud solutions for the Internet of Things. They're providing a state-of-the-art wireless connectivity to the Bloodhound supersonic car. This is a unique car. It's going to travel faster than a bullet. It uses the same connected car technology that Sierra Wireless is providing to transform the next generation of automobiles worldwide. So here we have it. We got a prototype out here for a unique car that will travel faster than a bullet, and we already have wireless technology out there for it. Okay, so it kind of changes the scope of things a little bit. I'd like to be able to have a car that travels faster than a bullet, but I can't imagine what the cost of something like that would be. So then that brings me to our next point, which is Apple, right, and our iOS devices. And I talk a lot about that because we really don't know what's going to happen when Apple releases their iPhone 8. We do know that it's going to come out in it's set to release in September of this year, but rumor has it that they are going to use iris scanning, retina scanning. They're going to use biometrics, facial recognition technology in that. So it's a rumor, and it came actually because they acquired a vendor called RealFace. So we don't really know what's going to come out with Apple, but you got to think about that. And I have some slides later on in regard to search warrant language and things like that. But currently, if we have a device that is used, and most of our devices now use fingerprint technology, right? So if you have a device that's fingerprint, that you use a fingerprint to unlock, and the suspect, let's say you don't know, you found the phone, so you don't have the suspect, or the suspect won't agree to give you their phone. If it's a civil case, and the suspect doesn't agree to give you their fingerprint, what options do you have? If you need to get into a device and the suspect won't give you their fingerprint, what are your options? What are your options? Okay, so that's it. You try and find something that they touched and copy their fingerprint. How are you going to copy their fingerprint? There is a method to do that actually, and yeah, actually we tried it with agar. Agar is a technology. It's kind of like the gummy bear gel. And I have a paper. If anybody's interested on it, I have a paper. I think I have it in the references where they took it and they recreated the fingerprint using something like that. They would, and there are like, and it depends on what it is. Like in criminal cases, there have been known cases where, like drug dealers and stuff like that, have actually burned off the tips of their fingers so that their fingerprints are unrecognizable. So if you have a case like that where somebody actually alters their fingerprints, you can get all the warrants you want. You get the fingerprint that you get off me is not going to open that device because I've altered my fingerprints.
Besides my fingerprint, there has to be a temperature. So if you get out his gummy bear stuff and it doesn't have the body temperature in it, it will open it.
That's right. But if it's heated to just the right body temperature and then put on there, but you're right, it's true. A lot of them are temperature censored. So that's a good point. Yes.
Can you just hook it up to a device and just use a password unlocker if it's that type of phone, like a Cellbrite or?
Not if it's done by biometrics.
Even though most of them have a PIN.
No, because you still need the biometrics to be able to unlock the device. In addition to, so you would need the biometrics and the PIN. So
I think I see what he's saying, and that's an option I put on there. If and I do that so that for security reasons, like my daughter or my wife picks up my phone, I do provide them with a PIN which they can use to get on the phone. So if they do the fingerprint and then it doesn't work, then it will come back and the pass.
The option.
And then I put that on.
Right, but you turn that on.
Yes.
It's not on automatically.
No.
Right. So there's the answer that if the phone is set up that way, yes. But generally speaking, unless that is activated, you're not going to be able to get into it without both pieces. All right. So that's a little bit about what's coming up with our security. So here's some things that happened in the last, and these actually, a lot of these came out of the last few days. The Idaho Department of Labor was hacked, personal data of 170,000 people at risk. Derek Bradley, the head of an online community of 17,000 financial service professors or professionals, had a phishing email sent out that was from him. So maybe some financial data got compromised. There's a SAP vulnerability out there that put business data at risk for thousands of companies, and SAP vulnerabilities are pretty big. Malware disguised Siemens software drills into 10 industrial plants. A double agent, a new injecting code technique, works on all versions of Microsoft Windows. It exploits a 15-year-old undocumented legitimate feature of Windows called Application Verifier, which cannot be patched. Okay, so these are some of the things that are happening out there, and you know, a lot of times I present and we talk a whole lot about regulation and compliance, and you know, don't we have regulations? We have regulations. We have compliance. But from that perspective, and my take on the whole thing is that if you're compliant, does that mean you're secure? Absolutely not. And so that's one of the problems I think that we have, is that we've placed so much on the fact that, you know, oh yeah, you know, we're following the regs, we check the boxes, we're compliant, but well, you may be compliant based on the regulations, but you're not secure. And I don't know that there's no such thing as full security. Really, there is not. But some of these things like this was an undocumented feature in Windows, and it comes all the way up to Windows 10, which one of the things should tell us a whole lot about our operating system vendors, right? That we reuse the same code over and over and over and over again. There's probably still code from like Windows 3.1 in there somewhere. But, so we have a lot of this stuff. And, one of the things that I have here last is about, and just because I have a weird sense of humor, is that we have Chinese hackers. They're using fake base transceiver stations. So basically, what happens when you have cell phone communications, the phone communicates to a cell tower, and then that goes to your mobile base station. So they put up these fake base transceiver stations, and they're distributing a swearing Trojan. So it's an Android banking Trojan, but the code has Chinese swear words in it. So that's how you can identify it, by the Chinese swear words that are in it. And it says that it once appeared, they thought that it was neutralized after its authors were arrested in a police raid, but Checkpoint found 15 different versions of it out there. So I don't know. I mean, I know that that we're spending a lot of money on security, but I don't know how well we're implementing it, or is it just that our hackers are one step ahead of us? Thoughts? Yeah, they did that with the Prime. Didn't they do that with Putin? Oh, is it? Okay. Yeah, they did it with somebody from another country. Yeah, that's true. True. Thank you. All right, so that's a little bit about security and, encryption and where we're going and what are some of the challenges we face. So the next thing I'm going to talk a little bit is about legislative changes, not so much in laws that we currently have that aren't implemented properly, but things that have come up recently that should give us all pause and wonder what's going on. So you all know about that WikiLeaks released dark matter, right? Anybody that didn't see this, right? WikiLeaks has been doing the Vault 7 stuff for the last couple of weeks. It contains documentation for several CIA projects that affect Apple Mac firmware. And one of the things we talk a whole lot about when we talk about Macs and Apple is that, we've had a lot of cases where even though the government has the technology to crack a lot of the security on devices, they have chosen to lose cases as opposed to actually divulging how their methods are performed. And so as a result, I think that a whole lot of this stuff that's coming out on WikiLeaks is a result of that. But one of the scary things about it, it says that it's persistent on your Apple devices. So which means that it's firmware malware. It's not anything that you can put the device back to factory reset and it works because it's firmware embedded. This one, I like it. I'm not really thrilled about this. We're going to talk a little bit about the IronKey and stuff with this, but our Senate voted to let ISP sell your web browsing history to advertisers. So the thing is now our ISP stands for invading subscriber privacy. It basically eliminates broadband privacy rules that would have required ISPs to get your explicit consent before selling or sharing web browsing data and other private information with our advertisers and other companies. So they said, no, we don't really care. We don't care about your information. We're going to let advertisers, because that's money. That's money, right? That's money that they can make off your data. So we don't care. All right. So what does that do? What does that do to the what does that cost? What does that cause your average citizen to think about? I mean, what?
First, you have the pile of chilling effects on the whole population if they know that they're being watched on the internet.
It does, and there were a couple things. that come to mind for me. Number one is ISPs don't retain data for a long period of time anyway. So unless there's something specific in the way that advertisers are going to request this information, all the ISP has to say is, we only hold that data for 48 hours. It's gone. We can't give it to you. They would have to say, I want today's data or I want yesterday's data. So the request would have to be pretty specific because they don't retain data for a long period of time. And how they would go about, what they would do with this is beyond me. But it's, it's a little bit scary for me. And I'm going to show, I want to make sure that I get through a lot of this because I know I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch. So I will not go over, but I do want to be sure that we get through everything. Yes.
I feel like they would just forward the data ongoing, and then the advertisers would just have their own retention solution. They can have all the hard drive space they want to retain that data. So even though that the ISP doesn't retain it, still forward it.
Yeah, but that's like a scary thing. It is. Yes, sir.
It just seems to make sense that an ISP would start retaining that data if it was a possible revenue generator for them in the future.
Okay, so that brings up a good point. So if the advertisers are going to pay the ISPs for this information, then the ISPs have a financial motive to say, yeah, okay, we're going to retain it, right? Okay, that's a good point. Very good point. All right. So the next thing is our FBI director recently floated an international framework on access to encrypted data. And this is from James Comey, and he said, I could imagine a community of nations committed to the rule of law developing a set of norms, a framework for when government access is appropriate. So basically what this means is that we're trying to develop a framework to basically put a backdoor in encryption so that we have access to whatever it is that we need. And some of this stems from the fact that the FBI has been trying to unlock 2,800 electronic devices, collective agents and local police and criminal investigations, and they had failed to open over 43% of them, even with their covert techniques. So at this point, the only way to get some of the information that the government is looking to get to solve cases is to do backdoors. So we're looking at floating that around. For those of you that had me in class know that the first one we've had quite a large discussion on is, recently we had a NASA scientist, or his work phone was seized at the airport. He came in, I don't know, based on the way he looked, I said, or Border Patrol said, no, we need to take your phone, and we need the PIN. There was a PIN on it. If he refused the PIN, they weren't going to allow him entry to the country. So he gave them the PIN, they imaged his phone, and then they imaged his phone, they gave it back to him, and they let him go. Okay, when I worked for Kroll, I traveled a whole lot. This would be a big problem for me. Not being able to get back into my own country because I don't want to supply the PIN for my phone. And what happened with this actually is this gentleman's employer actually took his phone when he got back to work. They gave him a new phone, and they took his phone, and they're doing forensics on it to see what happened, what was used, what happened while they had that phone, because you don't know. You don't know. They seize your phone, they say they image it, and then they give it back to you. What do you know? Do you know what they put on it? You don't know, right? So that's a big. The other thing is that CNN is reporting that the White House may be taking tentative steps to explore what it would take to scan social media accounts and cell phone accounts of all visitors to the United States, making social media screening a part of the process to enter the country. Okay, now the key word on this is visitors. So it probably wouldn't affect us that much, but even at that, what if you had family from another country that wanted to come visit, and our government says, if you want to get into our country, you got to let us scan all your social media accounts and your cell phone contacts before we let you into the country? Really? I don't know. So, search warrant language, and this brings me to the search warrant language for fingerprints and stuff like that. I actually have search warrant language for that type of thing. I have search warrant language for cloud acquisitions and all of that. But the fingerprints tends to be a little bit problematic, and that stems from this last one here, the last point, which was experts are outraged by warrant demanding fingerprints to unlock smartphones. And what happened with this case was it was a child pornography case, and agents went to everybody in an apartment building. They had a cell phone that had child porn on, and they weren't really sure who it belonged to. So they went to a building, and they said, everybody in the building's got to put your finger on this phone and see if it will unlock it. And and so what happened is the judge got involved. He's like, no, you can't do this, or you can't. I mean, it's one thing to do a search warrant and say, okay, we need your fingerprint. But it's another thing to go to a whole building and just be asking people to be putting their finger on the phone to see if it unlocks it, to trying to figure out who the child pornographer was. They had no right or no basis to do that. So that was something that came out of it. And then, this one, the 500 fingerprint clone unlocked murder victim Samsung S6. This is the research paper I have on how the fingerprint clone was actually done that unlocked a phone. So forensic-wise, we do have some recourse when we can't unlock a phone with the fingerprint. We have some methodologies out there that will allow us to do that. So what this really means is that now we're going to end up with a lot of private citizens using something like this, the IronKey. Has anybody ever seen one of these or used one of these? Yeah, I have one. Actually, I have it plugged into my laptop right now. I've had an IronKey for a long time. I've had it for many years. But, and the IronKey, basically how the IronKey works is, IronKey has its own Tor. So for those of you that want to keep your traffic from being intercepted or deciphered and set up a home Tor network, you're a whole lot better off just buying a device that already got Tor on it, because then you don't have to worry about it, and all the Tor goes through IronKey. So IronKey has their own Tor, and that's another thing too, that, as you're going through and doing investigations, probably what you may find now is you're going to find a lot of Tor and Vidalia and things like that on people's systems that not necessarily were used for bad things, but they were used because people wanted to protect their privacy. Okay? So that's one of the things that you have to consider. Thing too is that I tell examiners all the time is that IronKeys were marketed. I mean, they're really made for military and police forces. So, when you do a lot of these examinations, when you find Tor and Vidalia, you don't automatically assume that, that something bad was happening, because a lot of this has to do with protecting information, not so much crimes. And I have it plugged into my laptop. But I know it's getting close to time. We got about 12 minutes left, and I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So if you want to see what it looks like, let me know. Afterwards, I'll show you. So I've got it plugged in. You just bring it up. It's all self-contained. It has portable applications on it. So basically, it looks just like a regular Windows desktop. It's got a browser on it and stuff. You just use Firefox. So for me, if I want to do safe browsing, I just plug it in, and it has a piece on there for encrypted files. Where does it show me? It doesn't show where it is, but you have a space on there to keep encrypted files as well. So, you may find a lot more of that out there. So these are some of the things. Remember, I talked earlier about this, the gift being considered a deadly weapon. But one of this is that it has implications for roughly 10,000 people with photosensitive epilepsy in the United States. So what happens if legislature says, or the court says it's not really a deadly weapon, and then somebody receives an image that has epilepsy and it causes them to have a seizure and die? Then what happens? So, often, when we think about the cause of death, a lot of times we think about physical stuff, shooting, stabbing, things like that. But now we're to the point where we're looking at, we're kind of looking at what's going on technology-wise, that we have the technology to actually kill people, with the stuff that with the stuff that we sent. Now, this other one too I thought was really interesting is we have a U.S. appeals judge ruled that claiming that you cannot remember your passphrase to unlock your data is willful defiance. So I forgot my decryption password is contempt of court. So that at least we got that, at least we got that out of it. That if you say you don't remember your your password, it's contempt of court. So sensors, and this actually is Bruce Schneer. This was what I was talking about earlier. That through sensors for IoT, we're giving the internet eyes and ears. We're giving it hands and feet, and we're giving it a brain. So we're creating an internet that senses, thinks, and acts. This is the classic definition of a robot. And I contend that we're building a world-sized robot without even realizing it. So that's where we're at. Why traditional forensics won't work? We can't see servers. we are now going to be more dependent on providers to acquire evidence. People collecting the data for us may not even be qualified to do that forensic acquisition. I mean, this happens a whole lot in cloud. IoT and cloud, a lot of the data is held in the cloud, so it's kind of, it's kind of interconnected. I do a lot of stuff on cloud, but, the data collection may not even be done by somebody who's qualified. And you don't know the location or the state of the physical data. So, it's changed a whole lot. So the challenges that we face with a lot of these technological changes are complexity. There's not a whole lot of standards or certification there. What do we do about records management? How are the records being managed? What format are they in? How long are records retained? Especially when you're talking about ISPs. A lot of times ISPs don't retain records for a long time. So what happens if we implement something like that, the technology where an advertiser is going to pay an ISP for that data, and then you do a search warrant on the ISP. The ISP says, I no longer have the data. So then what? You go to the advertiser? Do you subpoena or send a search warrant to the advertiser and say, okay, well, the advertisers are analyzing this data. So logically, if you think about it, the advertisers probably have a longer data retention period than the ISPs. So that's like a thing, you need to work on a case. You got to go to an advertiser to get somebody's data. That's like, I don't know, that's pretty scary to me. And the other thing too is we don't know what service providers are doing and how they monitor for compliance. And that's a big thing. You don't know. I mean, we put a lot of these IoT things out there. There's no security on them. We don't know where they're going, what they're doing. So, and the main problem that we have is that it's such a dynamic nature. It's such a dynamic nature that it's really, really hard. And in forensics, a lot of the data that we analyze is static. The static stuff is easy to do. It's the dynamic stuff that's hard. When cloud forensics first came out, we had a lot of virtualization and stuff. Getting out there and getting out in the cloud and that VM was the hardest thing to do. Once you got it, then, the static analysis is easy to do. So we have a lot of major technology areas, which are cloud computing, mobile devices, computers, tablets, sensors, RFID. So it's all contained. So some of the tools and processes, vendor-wise, vendors usually develop tools, and they develop tools for their own purposes. They develop them to be able to give themselves metrics, to be able to give themselves data about what's going on. And that's particularly true in the cloud. Where in the cloud, a lot of, if you go to AWS, they have tons of tools in there that they've made for themselves to be able to monitor what's going on. So a lot of times, vendor-developed tools are going to help us do that. Research, particularly in encryption. I have a paper that somebody recently wrote on different methods to bypass certain types of encryptions. I have that if you're interested. Just let me know and I'll share it with you. And so ready-made service provider tools, actually that should have been different from vendor development. But our vendors, Parabin, F-Response, Encase, Access Data, our vendors should be out there developing tools that will help us. A lot of times it comes late, sometimes too late, but our vendors do try to develop tools to help us. So, when we look at processes, forensic processes for Internet of Things, really what we're looking at is and this is one approach. One approach is to categorize them into 3 groups. Evidence from smart devices and sensors, evidence from hardware and software, and then evidence collected from hardware and software that are outside the network under investigation. So you have inside, outside, what are included in traditional, and then what is outside. So this is one approach, is to take that evidence and group it into 3 groups. This is another one. This calls it 3 zones, where it segregate out the crime scene into internal, border, and external zones. So and the whole thing of it is you're going to have to know a whole lot more about networks than you used to know, because you got to know where data's coming in, where it's going out. You got to be able to follow data flows. So with this, what we're going to do is we're going to take a zone-based approach, and it's not to restart digital forensics from the rest position, but to take it from a changing landscape approach and approach it a little differently. So these are some of the processes that are out there. I have papers on these. If you're interested in them, I'll share them with you. Tool-wise, F-Response does a lot of cloud stuff. They're working on Internet of Things. Celebrite right now has a cloud analyzer. I'm sure they'll be working on Internet of Things. Paraben has the capability to do some smartwatches, not a whole lot. I got one from a foreign country with the international SIM, and we couldn't do anything with it. No vendor has anything that will analyze that device. Windows won't see it. We had all kind of problems with it. But Paraben does have the ability to do some smartwatches and things like that, and I know that they're working on the Internet of Things. So from data acquisition perspective, you're going to have to look at contracts and service level agreements probably. You're going to have to know a lot about network forensics. You're going to have to understand what kind of vendor tools there are out there, and you're probably going to have to collect an awful lot of logs. Here's some resources for you. Bruce Schneier has some information on Internet of Things. Jigang Liu is the first set of processes, and this is the paper for the 123 process that is in zones. So I have a little bit of resources for you, and that leaves us how much time? 3 minutes for questions. Yes, sir.
Two situations that I don't know whether I'm real or not. ABC in the Today Show demonstrated about 2 weeks ago that Wi-Fi cars can actually be controlled once they are hacked into, and they actually did demonstrate that at the parking lot. I don't know whether that's real.
Well, okay, and you know what, and there's a lot of demos out there. There's the Jeep, they did the Jeep where they actually took over control of the Jeep. Number one, in order to do that, you gotta know a whole lot about how a car system works. So it's not your everyday hacker on the street's gonna be able to pick up and do this. You have, it's a very fine-tuned, acquired skill. I'll put it that way.
Then the other second issue is that about, I get a feed from CompTIA, and they actually reported that there are a ton of cell phone towers out there. Nobody knows who owns them.
Well, that's true. You don't know, well, and that's why I was talking about the base station transceivers, because you don't know who puts them up. I mean, normally that stuff is monitored. I believe that's supposed to be monitored, but like by the FCC. But yeah, but does the FCC really know when people put towers up? Unless they request a license or something like that. I mean, you could probably put up a tower, and I mean, how long would it take them till they found out, till somebody had an incident and they reported it? A lot of times it's reactive, it's not proactive. So that's entirely possible. Yes, sir.
I want to piggyback off the legislation having to do with the sales of the internet history.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to just tell everybody to call your representatives. Because it's more important than ever.
It is. I don't know how much it will help, though, but it is. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Incognito mode, well, you're still going through the ISP. Okay, incognito mode is only going to protect what's going to show in the index.dat on your laptop. It's not necessarily going to protect what's going through the ISP. So I would think that the ISP probably still would be able to have some information. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Enjoy your lunch.